Must be hard growing up, the son of a screw-up, that's what one student said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Could this mockery hide a forgotten hero? The old veteran didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, he just looked down as if trying to disappear, and no one said a word, not the professors, not the guests, not even the veterans sitting in the front row, no one, until Lucas Cole stood up. The son of a man 6 Navy SEALs once rose for the son who stayed silent for too long, but this time he didn't hesitate, and he didn't stand for his father, he stood for another veteran, a man no one clapped for, a man they laughed at because history forgot his name, but Lucas didn't. What he said next silenced the room. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. 1 year, that's how long it had been since the auditorium fell silent, since 6 Navy SEALs stood shoulder to shoulder behind a man they once followed into hell and stood still not for ceremony but for respect, since a quiet old Marine named Raymond Cole refused to leave the back of the room until the whole room stood for him, and 1 year since his son Lucas stood on that same stage and said the words that cracked the air open, "That's my dad." That moment went viral. Clips from the ceremony were shared thousands of times, news articles followed, a few veterans' blogs picked it up and called it the reminder America needed. Lucas Cole, 23 years old now, had become something he never asked to be, the son of a symbol, and he wasn't sure what to do with that. Could this legacy weigh too heavy? Lucas lived in a small apartment just off campus in Charlottesville, Virginia. It was quiet, nothing fancy, just a studio with peeling blinds, a beat-up microwave, and a stack of books always leaning too far. On the kitchen counter, he kept a photo frame above his desk, not the famous one, not the picture of his father being saluted by the SEALs, no, it was a smaller one, an old photo of his dad sitting on the edge of a bed, shining his boots, while a 5-year-old Lucas slept nearby, wrapped in a blanket, one sock off, a toy truck in his hand. That was the version of his dad he remembered best, not the legend, just the man who worked 2 jobs, mowed the lawn in silence, and always packed an extra sandwich in Lucas's lunch because you never know who might be hungry. That's who he missed. But the world at UVA, it had other plans. After graduation, Lucas received a letter from the university. He'd been offered a graduate scholarship, full ride for a research program on post-service reintegration. His essay, "The Day My Father Was Seen," had struck a chord. They wanted him, they wanted his story, they wanted his last name. He said yes, but now, a year into his internship at the Mid-Atlantic Veterans Wellness Foundation, Lucas felt like an imposter every time he scanned his key card. The office was nice enough, beige walls, coffee that tasted like cardboard, and inspirational posters in every hallway. The staff was kind, supportive. They said things like, "You're doing this for your dad, right?" Or, "Bet he'd be proud to see you here." But every time someone brought up Master Sergeant Raymond Cole, Lucas felt a little smaller, not because he wasn't proud, he was, God he was, but because deep down he couldn't shake the truth. He didn't feel like his father's son, not in the way people assumed. He wasn't brave, not really. He had never held a rifle, never slept in the dirt, never buried a brother in arms, never returned home with something missing and tried to walk like it wasn't. He had never worn the uniform, only the name, and lately, even that felt too big on him. On most days, Lucas worked in the intake support office. That meant greeting new arrivals, veterans coming in for physical therapy, PTSD counseling, career placement, or just someone to talk to. His job was simple: smile, sign them and make a pot of bad coffee, ask if they needed anything, but he could tell most of them didn't want to talk to him. They'd glance at his badge, Lucas Cole, graduate intern, they'd nod politely, then look past him for someone else, someone with creases in their uniform, with sleeves that hid stories, with eyes that had seen what theirs had. He didn't blame them. Sometimes he looked past himself, too. Could this doubt lead to a breakthrough? One afternoon, Lucas stayed late to finish filing a stack of forms. The office was empty, just the buzz of fluorescent lights and the software of the printer behind him. He leaned back in the rolling chair, rubbed his eyes, and exhaled. On the wall behind his desk hung a plaque with the Foundation's mission statement, "To serve those who served." It sounded good, noble, righteous, even, but Lucas didn't feel like he was serving anyone. He felt like he was playing a role someone else had written, and he wasn't sure he believed in the lines. He stared at the ceiling. Maybe he wasn't supposed to follow in his father's footsteps. Maybe he couldn't. That weekend, Lucas visited the cemetery, not because it was an anniversary, just because. The grave was simple: military-issue headstone, Master Sergeant Raymond Cole, 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, United States Marine Corps. Below the inscription were 5 words etched faintly, faintly beneath the dates. He stood when others couldn't. Lucas sat on the grass beside it, folded his hands, stayed quiet. After a while, he whispered, "Dad, I'm trying." The wind shifted, a leaf rolled past his shoes somewhere far off, a flag snapped against a pole. I don't feel like I belong here." He swallowed hard, looked down. "I wish I knew what you'd say." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy, heavy like memory, heavy like truth. Lucas didn't cry, not this time. But he didn't leave either. He sat there until the sun dipped low and the grass grew cold, and somewhere deep inside he wondered, if I'm not my father, then who am I? 3 days later his supervisor approached him at the office. "Lucas, we've got a travel assignment if you're up for it. He blinked. Where to? Colorado Springs Veterans Transitional Housing Center. They've asked for someone to help document long-term outcomes. Bit of data, bit of listening. Lucas hesitated. You'd leave Friday, back Monday. We'll cover the travel. Why me? She smiled. Because you still care enough to ask that question. That night, Lucas packed his duffel bag, laptop, notepad, rain jacket. At the last minute, he reached into his drawer and pulled out the framed photo, not the viral one, the one of his father shining his boots in the quiet. He tucked it between his clothes, not because he needed it, but because maybe someone else would. The plane touched down just after 8 p.m. Lucas stepped off the jet bridge into the cool, crisp air of Colorado Springs, a chill riding beneath his collar despite the clear sky overhead. Mountains loomed in the distance, tall, unmoving, indifferent, the kind of place where stories don't shout, they just echo. A white government van was waiting at the curb with a decal on the side that read Veterans Transitional Housing Center. The driver was quiet, mid-40s, weathered hands, said his name was Nate. Didn't talk much after that, just nodded when Lucas offered a polite good morning, then turned up the local radio station low enough to be background noise. Lucas didn't mind the silence. The drive was long enough to think, but not long enough to settle his nerves. He wasn't sure what he expected from this trip. Just a weekend assignment, interview a few long-term residents, collect notes, write a summary for the foundation board. It should have been simple, but nothing about this place felt simple. The center sat just outside town, a low building made of stone and siding, surrounded by a handful of tall pines and 3 faded flagpoles. There were no gates, no security, no cameras, just a wooden sign out front that said, "Rest, regroup, rise." Lucas read the words twice before stepping inside. The air smelled like pine cleaner and coffee. A woman named Melissa greeted him at the front desk, offered a clipboard, and walked him through the day's schedule. There's one resident in particular you'll want to meet, she said, flipping through her notes. Name's Eli Ward, Marine Corps, moved in last year after spinal surgery. Lucas nodded, jotting down the name. He okay to be interviewed? She paused, her smile softening. Eli doesn't say much, but if he talks to you, it means something. Lucas glanced up. What do you mean? She shrugged. You'll see. They met in the garden. It wasn't much of a garden, just a small patch of soil behind the center with some stubborn tomato plants and a crooked wooden bench. Eli Ward sat in a wheelchair under the shade of a crooked tree, a wool blanket tucked around his waist, and a black ball cap pulled low over tired eyes. Lucas approached slowly. Mr. Ward. The man looked up, his eyes were sharp, clear, not surprised, just measuring. Lucas offered a hand. I'm Lucas Cole, I'm with the Mid-Atlantic Veterans Foundation. I'm here for the weekend, hoping to speak with a few residents about their transition experience. Eli didn't move right away. Then, after a beat, he nodded. You can sit, he said, voice gravelly but steady. If you're not here to sell anything. Lucas smiled and lowered himself onto the bench. For a long time, they just sat there, no questions, no answers, just the rustle of dry leaves and the faint chirp of birds overhead. Finally, Eli spoke. You're Cole's kid? Lucas blinked. Excuse me. The old man didn't look at him, just stared out at the garden bed like he was reading something written only he could see. Raymond Cole, 3rd Recon, Afghanistan, 2006. Lucas's breath caught. Yes, he said quietly, that was my dad. Eli was silent for a long time, then he reached into the side pouch of his chair, a slow, deliberate motion, and pulled out a folded weather-worn photograph. He handed it to Lucas without a word. Lucas unfolded the photo. 6 men, full combat gear. Dusty smiles, sun-scorched faces, arms around each other. Behind them, the broken shell of a stone compound, smoke still curling in the distance, and there in the middle, his father, Raymond Cole, helmet off, sleeves rolled, dirt across his cheek and a grin that somehow still felt like home. Lucas stared at the image, his throat tightening. I haven't seen this before, he whispered. Eli nodded slowly. We took it after Firewatch, the day we got out. He paused, then added, or the day he got us out. Lucas looked up. What happened? Eli's voice was low, measured, like the words were being drawn from a place too deep to disturb casually. We were pinned in a valley compound. Supply drop missed the LZ. Took mortar fire before sunrise. Roof collapsed. Half the team buried. He exhaled slowly, eyes flickering. Raymond went back in, pulled 2 of us out, went back again, then again. Lucas didn't breathe. The 3rd time, I told him not to. Said no one else could still be alive under that rubble. Eli paused. Ray looked me dead in the eye and said, if they were me, they'd come back. The silence that followed wasn't quiet, it was full, heavy with memory, thick with truth. He found me under the far wall, crushed spine, half conscious. I don't remember the ride out, just the sound of his voice. Lucas didn't know what to say. Eli looked at him now, fully, directly, and in his eyes, Lucas saw not just respect, but something deeper. You don't look like him. Lucas smiled weakly. No, I don't. You don't move like him either. No. Lucas said again, quieter. Eli leaned forward, his voice soft. But when you sat down, you waited. You didn't fear the silence, you listened, you let it breathe. Lucas blinked. That's what he used to do. He handed the photo back, but Eli waved it off. It's yours now. Lucas looked down at the image again, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his notebook. Eli shifted slightly in his chair. Adjusting the blanket, you're wondering if you're supposed to become him. Lucas didn't answer. You don't have to. The wind picked up, gentle, but cool. You don't have to carry the same load, just know why he carried it, that's what matters. Lucas looked up, eyes searching the man in front of him. Why did he go back in, Mr. Ward? Eli's answer was simple, because someone had to. Then he added, and that's the kind of legacy that doesn't need to be worn, it just needs to be remembered. That night, back in his dorm-style room at the center, Lucas sat at the small desk and laid the photo flat across the surface. He stared at his father's face, then wrote in his notebook slowly, some men teach with medals, others teach with footprints they leave behind. He went back in, not for glory, not for headlines, but because someone had to. Lucas closed the book. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and somewhere in the silence, he felt the first shift, not toward becoming his father, but toward becoming someone his father would have walked toward in the fire for. Could this shift redefine his purpose? Lucas returned to Virginia with more than just a field report. He came back with a photograph folded inside his notebook, an old voice still echoing in his ears, and a story he hadn't expected to carry, not because it was about his father, but because it wasn't. It was about someone else, about someone saved, and somehow that felt heavier. Eli Ward hadn't asked for an audience, he wasn't interested in medals or citations, he barely wanted to talk, but when he did, the truth was undeniable. Some men survive by being rescued, and some become rescuers by refusing to leave anyone behind. That line stayed with Lucas like a splinter he didn't want to pull out. A week after the trip, Lucas was invited to a veteran student symposium at the university. It was a networking event for military-connected students, a mix of ROTC cadets, military family members, former service members now in school, and faculty who oversaw research on war, history, and policy. Lucas hesitated before accepting the invitation. He didn't like events with lanyards and buffet tables and hollow conversations. He didn't like the questions, the ones that came right after someone recognized his last name. Oh, wait, are you the one from that SEAL story? He never knew how to answer that, but something about Eli's words, "You let the silence breathe," made him wonder if maybe showing up was a kind of answer, too. So he went to the auditorium buzzed with small talk and clinking coffee cups. Lucas found a seat near the middle, tucked between a pair of student veterans swapping deployment stories and a group of political science majors in matching polos. The stage held a long table with name placards, guest speakers, professors, and one student presenter scheduled to share a personal essay. Lucas glanced down at the program, The Cost of Silence, a personal reflection, James Carver, student. The name didn't ring a bell. He folded the paper and tucked it under his seat. The moderator opened with the usual welcome, stats about veteran student enrollment, quotes about duty, sacrifice, gratitude, of course, always gratitude. Then it was James Carver's turn. The room quieted as the young man stepped onto the stage. Lucas watched as he adjusted the microphone. He was maybe 20, tall, pale, glasses too big for his face. He looked like someone who spent more time in libraries than locker rooms. He cleared his throat and opened a printed sheet. "My name is James Carver," he began, voice steady but small. "My father served in the U.S. Army. He was captured during a mission in 2003. He spent 19 months in a POW camp before being recovered in a prisoner swap that never made the news." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. No drama, just fact. When he came home, he was not celebrated. There were no flags, no speeches, just headlines about the failed mission and silence that followed us for years. He took a breath. "I grew up being told my father was a coward, that he surrendered, that he didn't deserve to wear the uniform anymore." A few chuckles echoed from the back of the room. Lucas turned sharply. Two students, both older, maybe graduate level, exchanged smirks. One whispered just loud enough, "Must be hard growing up, the son of a screw-up." Laughter rippled, not much, just enough to make James pause. Lucas felt his stomach twist. He looked at James, still standing, still reading as if he hadn't heard, or maybe he had, and just didn't want to give them the satisfaction. But Lucas heard it, and it landed hard, not because it was cruel, but because it mirrored something Lucas had been carrying for years, the fear of not measuring up, of being seen only in the shadow of someone else's war. Except this wasn't a shadow, this was mockery in the light. Lucas's heartbeat thudded in his ears. He stared down at his knees, his hands, his badge clipped to the lanyard. He thought of Eli, he thought of that day in the garden, he thought of his father's voice, the one he didn't remember in words, only in tone, the tone that never raised itself to shout, but always landed like a quiet truth. You don't walk away from someone just because they're quiet. Lucas looked up. James had gone silent on stage, his hands trembled slightly around the paper. No one else moved. The moderator leaned forward as if to fill the gap. But before he could speak, Lucas stood. The scrape of his chair echoed louder than expected. Dozens of heads turned. He didn't wait for permission. He stepped out into the aisle, walked down to the front, and turned around to face the room. He didn't need a mic, he didn't need notes. His voice was calm, but clear. "My name is Lucas Cole," he said. "It some of you might recognize that name." A few more turned. "I'm the son of a Marine, Master Sergeant Raymond Cole." A pause, not for effect, For breath, he's the man who stood at the back of a graduation ceremony, and while others tried to push him out, the man who didn't raise his voice, even when they told him he didn't belong. Lucas looked directly at the students in the back, the one still smirking, but less certain now, and the man 6 Navy SEAL stood for without being asked. The room was still. But that's not why I'm standing today. He turned to James, still standing off to the side, paper lowered. Eyes wide. I'm not standing because of my father's legacy, I'm standing because of yours. James blinked. Lucas turned back to the crowd. We say we honor service, we say we respect sacrifice, but sometimes only certain stories get remembered. His tone stayed steady, and sometimes silence becomes the only thing a family ever gets back. He pointed gently toward James. This man's father survived what most of us couldn't imagine, not because he failed, but because he endured, and that kind of survival. That's not weakness, that's war. After the war, someone coughed. No one laughed. Lucas took a step forward. And maybe you don't understand what that means. Maybe you think war is only fought on the battlefield. He let the words hang. Well, I'm here to tell you it's also fought in kitchens, in hospital waiting rooms, in quiet houses where kids grow up wondering if they're allowed to be proud. Lucas's voice dropped just slightly. And if you can't see that, then maybe the problem isn't their story, it's yours. Silence, but not shame, just awareness. He turned back to James and offered a single nod, then walked slowly back to his seat. He didn't need applause, he didn't expect it. But before he could sit, someone else stood, then another, then the moderator, then the room. Not all, but enough to make James' voice stop shaking when he finished reading his last paragraph, enough to make the smirks disappear, enough to shift the air from judgment to witness. Could this moment change lives? Later, outside the auditorium, James found Lucas by the vending machines. He looked different now, taller somehow. I didn't think anyone would say anything, James said. Lucas shrugged. I almost didn't. James smiled, small and real. What changed your mind? Lucas paused, then reached into his notebook, pulled out a folded photograph, and handed it to him. 6 men, 1 mission, 1 survivor. James studied it for a long time. Who's this? He asked. Lucas smiled softly. Someone who taught me that silence isn't weakness and not all battles need uniforms. It started with a recording. Someone in the crowd had filmed Lucas's speech on their phone, not for attention, not for social media fame, just to remember. But within 24 hours, that shaky, quiet clip had spread beyond the university. Veterans forums picked it up first, then local news, then a national military podcast. The title they gave it wasn't flashy. He stood up because someone else couldn't. Within a week, Lucas received over 100 emails, most from strangers. Sons who'd never spoken publicly about their fathers, widows who hadn't heard a kind word about their husband in years, soldiers who'd spent more time fighting guilt than gunfire. One message simply read, I was in that camp with James Carver's father, thank you for saying what we couldn't. But the one that stayed with Lucas came from his university. It wasn't long, just a few lines. We saw your words, we saw your courage, we'd like to honor the man you spoke about, would you help us bring him here? Attached was a name, Eli Ward. 2 weeks later, Lucas found himself standing at the entrance of the Veterans Transitional Housing Center in Colorado. Again, same pine trees, same crooked flagpole, same wine through the windows, but this time, he wasn't there for a field report, he was there to ask a question. Eli was in the garden as always, his blanket draped over his lap, a small cup of tea resting on the tray attached to his wheelchair. Lucas approached slowly. Mr. Ward, he said, voice softer than usual, I've got a request for you. Eli didn't look up right away, then after a beat, he sipped his tea and said, if it's about weeding the tomatoes again, I'm retired. Lucas chuckled. No, he said, it's about being seen. That made Eli glance up, and staying up, Lucas pulled out a folder and laid it on the table. Inside a printed letter from the university, an invitation, a request for him to attend a ceremony in his honor, not for medals, not for rescue missions, but for surviving, for being the last thread in a story no one else had finished telling. Eli stared at the page, then closed the folder without reading the whole thing. I'm not one for stages, he said. Lucas nodded. I know. Eli looked down at his hands, scarred, bent, one knuckle missing, been invisible this long. He murmured, got used to it. Lucas didn't push, just waited. Eli finally looked up. But if you're asking, and if it's for something bigger than me, he tapped the folder gently, then let's go. The ceremony was small by design, no red carpets, no trumpets, just a podium under the campus flag, a few rows of chairs, one microphone. But that day, people stood for a man they had never met, professors, students, local vets, kids from the ROTC program, lining the walkways in pressed uniforms, saluting a man who hadn't worn one in decades. Lucas stood beside Eli as he received the first silent service recognition ever awarded by the school, and when it was his turn to speak, Eli didn't say much. He rolled up to the microphone, took a breath, then simply said, I didn't come back for applause, but I'm grateful someone still hears the quiet ones. That was it, that was enough. In the weeks that followed, more letters arrived. This time, they weren't addressed just to Lucas, they came from historical archives, from military oral history projects, Even from the Library of Congress, one letter stood out from the Department of Veterans Affairs National Story Project. They had watched Lucas's speech, read the transcript, and asked, "Would you consider joining a national initiative to help collect the untold stories of veterans who were forgotten, not because they lacked courage, but because they didn't seek attention?" Lucas sat with the letter for a long time. He didn't need time to decide. He spent the next few months interviewing names that history had skipped: a nurse who served in Kandahar and treated men the world thought were beyond saving, a translator from Fallujah who carried trauma like luggage, unclaimed and unspoken, a pilot who never spoke of the crash he survived because everyone else on the flight didn't. Lucas sat with them, listened, wrote, archived, not to glorify, not to dramatize, but to remember, because some stories aren't loud, they whisper, and they wait for someone to hear them. On the last day of fall, Lucas drove back to Colorado. Eli's garden had gone quiet for the winter, but inside the center, the heater clicked gently, and the air smelled of pine soap and something warm in the kitchen. Lucas sat across from Eli at a small round table by the window, 2 cups of tea, 1 old blanket. A quiet afternoon. He opened his notebook, ready to share the latest chapter, but Eli reached across the table, slow, deliberate, and placed his hand on Lucas's. His fingers were stiff, crooked, but steady. "You know," he said softly, "there was a moment under that rubble when I thought, this is it." Lucas looked up. Eli smiled faintly. "And then your dad came back, not once, not twice, but that third time." He let the words breathe. "You know what made him do it?" Lucas shook his head. "He told me later, someone has to be the one who goes back in, even when nobody else thinks it matters." Eli leaned back in his chair. "This time, Lucas," he said quietly, "you're the one who went back in." The tea steamed quietly between them. No applause, no audience, just 2 people and a story worth remembering. That night in his apartment back in Charlottesville, Lucas sat at his desk. He pulled out the same photo he carried since Colorado, the one of his father and Eli. And the others, younger, dirtier, alive. He traced a fingertip along the crease where the picture folded, then looked at his own reflection in the window and whispered, "I don't need to become you, Dad, I just need to be someone you'd be proud to look in the eye." He folded the photo gently, tucked it beside the newest entry in his journal, closed the notebook, and let the silence say the rest. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.